Welcome, seekers and searchers. So we are in 2 Samuel and chapter 12, verses 20 and following. David's son has died, and this is the first child of David and Bathsheba. And the second son, will be Solomon, but the first one has died. And then after that happens, David rose from the ground, washed, anointed himself. So put aromatic oils on his head and changed his clothes. He went to the house of the Lord and worshipped. That's in verse 20. But there is no house of the Lord because David did not build the temple or the house of the Lord. Solomon will in the future. So that's anachronistic. That is not an accurate portrayal of what happened. In chapters 13 and following, we have the story of the rape of Tamar. So this may or may not happen, it may not be historical, but again, it's just like this negative history, this negative account, this negative propaganda about the house of David. Verse 1, sometime passed, David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and David's son Amnon fell in love with her. So David has many wives, many concubines. So these are half-brothers, half-sisters. So what happens is that Amnon, who is David's firstborn, rapes Tamar. That's in chapter 13. Later in chapter 13, verse 28, Absalom, who's Tamar's brother, avenges her rape and commands his servants to kill Amnon. As Amnon is the firstborn, he's the oldest son of David, he is perceived as the next king. So this is also a very important political story. David has many sons and daughters, but why this is perhaps more important is that it's a story of the ascension to the throne and who becomes the next king. So we see rape and murder in David's family. Again, this ideology about whether or not Israel should have a king. What are the benefits? What are the costs? What are some of the negative aspects of it? So this is really an amazing story. Again, I don't know if it's historical. Scholars can't really pin this down as being something historical. But nevertheless, here we have these stories. And again, it does not appear that the Davidic kingship, the Davidic lineage, is anything really exceptional here. David is not really shown to be a particularly insightful or great ruler at all, and his family seems to be set with problems. It's hard to imagine this surviving as pro-kingship propaganda. So perhaps it is this negative view of the kingship after the exile. In the story of the rape of Tamar, King David is portrayed as being very weak. He loved his firstborn, loved in the sense of being loyal to, devoted to. So sometimes when we read the word love in the Hebrew scriptures, it has more to do with political loyalty. And that can even go to the famous saying, love the Lord with your whole heart and whole mind. Love in the sense of being particularly loyal to. And that was used in covenants between kings and their subjects. You should love the king, meaning you should be loyal to the king. So in any case, David here loves Amnon, and he doesn't punish Amnon for raping his daughter as well. One would presume he loved his daughter as well. So David is shown to be out of touch here, and he cannot control his children. He cannot punish them, and we will see that he's also characterized this way in regards to Absalom. Absalom has had his servants kill Amnon, so he flees. He's not welcome. He's killed someone that seems to go so far, but he is eventually able to return to Jerusalem after several years. King David won't see him for another couple more years. But he does. But then Absalom tries to usurp the throne from David. And you can read that account on your own. It's fairly clearly written. Absalom returns to Jerusalem, as I said, and here's the description. He was uh, very beautiful, the text says. Now in all Israel there was no one to be praised so much for his beauty as Absalom. When he cut the hair of his head once a year, it weighed 200 shekels, or maybe 30, 40 pounds. And so that will become important in the later part of the story. He usurps the throne. He takes leaders back to Hebron, and so he pulls together some armed forces, and David is forced to flee Jerusalem. King David flees. He just leaves 10 concubines there to take care of the house. And you can read that. It's back and forth, and eventually Absalom comes back to Jerusalem, and one of his advisors says, go to your father's concubines. And he does. He sleeps with them. He sleeps with the 10 concubines. And that is, besides being an insult to his father, is also a claim to the throne. It's as if saying, look at him now. He has the king's concubines. He has usurped the throne. And the text is very readable here. You can read that, and we'll end up in chapter 18. Absalom gets his head caught in the branches, and he's sort of left hanging in this oak. So it's this idea of measure for measure, the appropriateness of the punishment. Perhaps his vanity about his beauty and hair serves to be his undoing. So his punishment is related to his sin. And additionally, this idea of a measured punishment is seen in verse 15, where he is killed by 10 young men. They surround him, strike him, and kill him. So Absalom is killed by 10 men, which harkens back to the detail of Absalom having slept with 10 of his father's concubines. So this was a story of Absalom trying to usurp the throne. He's unsuccessful. He's killed. And the text is careful to not place any of blame for that on David. And in fact, David is shown to be so deeply moved that he cannot act. And he says, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would that I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." So he's grieving for his son. But his son tried to kill him, got military forces to kill him, tried to usurp the throne from him, had relations with his concubines, and that upsets the people who were devoted to David. And he said, "And you have hated those who love you and loved those who have hated you." So he is told by Joab to do something about that and change. So David is again portrayed as weak and ineffective, especially in dealing with his children. So much of this book of 2 Samuel has been very much repeating this theme of really how terrible a king David has been. In chapter 20, we have another rebellion. This one is put down, and we have an account of the 10 concubines. David puts them in a house. He doesn't have relations with them again, and he cares for them till their death. Then in chapter 21, we have a somewhat complicated account that ends up with the death of 7 of Saul's sons. So again, we can look at this in terms of a change of houses, a change in rulership, that it was not a peaceful transfer of power, that here again we see Saul's 7 sons being killed. In the 22nd chapter of 2 Samuel, we have David's song of thanksgiving. And it starts with, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer." So God is described as a rock, something solid, and deliverer, but also as a fortress. A fortress is a military building, a fort. And we perhaps might look at that in modern times and just take that as a metaphor, and it is a metaphor, but it's also a metaphor that is very closely aligned with military strength. So God is like military strength. You could say many things, you could use many other metaphors for the divine. God is soft and loving, kind, whatnot, but here is the start of these military metaphors. "My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation." So a shield, again, a military metaphor. And this really relates to the reality of David's life as a military person. "My stronghold, my refuge, Yahweh, my Savior, you save me from violence." So this is someone experiencing violence, and we have seen in 2 Samuel, these were very violent times, even during the reign of David, and maybe especially so. "I called upon the Lord, Yahweh." I call upon Yahweh. So again, this is this national tribal God, Yahweh, with this specific name. Yahweh is a proper name, is a name of a person. It's a name of one God among many gods. It's not the more generic universal El or Elohim that people would often think. And Yahweh just does not mean Lord. Lord means a political leader, a master. And Yahweh does not mean that. Yahweh, we're not quite sure exactly what it means, but it is not the word Lord. "I call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies." Yeah, King David had lots of enemies. He was the enemy of them. They were engaged in constant military battles. So we might not really think about this. We might take it as a metaphor. But we look at it from King David's perspective and his court and the people, the leaders of Jerusalem. That here is a prayer to God, and it is just replete and full of military metaphors. So in 2 Samuel 22:8 and following, we have this image of God, image of Yahweh as this storm God, this warrior God. It's a theophany. It is a manifestation of the divine in terms of the earth shaking and lightning and sound. This is not a God of silent meditation. "The earth reeled and rocked, the foundations of the heavens trembled." So God in heaven, in the skies, in heaven, everything's quaking because he was angry. So anger seems to be an emotion that is very closely aligned with Yahweh. "Smoke went from his nostrils, devouring fire from his mouth." I don't think most people think of the God of the Bible as being this fire-breathing, smoke-producing dragon, cosmic thunderstorm, military-style divine warrior. But this is the image here. There are other images. "Glowing coals flamed forth from him. Thick darkness was under his feet." So the darkness, maybe the darkness of thunderstorm. "He rode on a cherub, an angel, and flew. He was on the wings of the wind. He made darkness around him, thick clouds. Out of the brightness before him the coals of fire flamed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven, the Most High." So Yahweh thundered from heaven, the Most High uttered his voice. "He sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning." So these lightning bolts coming out like arrows. "Then the channels of the sea were seen. The foundations of the world were laid bare." So this cosmic destructive force, almost like Shiva, The foundations of the world were laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. So this is a very different kind of image of God, a fire-breathing, angry God. Verse 26 and following is a little bit more philosophical. With the loyal, you show yourself loyal. With the blameless, you show yourself blameless. With the pure, you show yourself pure, and with the crooked, you show yourself perverse. You deliver a humble people, but your eyes are upon the haughty to bring them down. Indeed, you are my lamps, O Yahweh. Yahweh lightens my darkness. So that is a different a different kind of image that somehow a person's moral stature, the personality characteristics of people are reflected back in God. So God is a judge here. In verses 35 and 38, we have a more explicit return to military imagery. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. So in case of a bow and arrow with a bow made of bronze. I pursued my enemies and destroyed them, and did not turn my back until they were consumed. I crushed them and stamped them down in the mire of the streets. For this I will exalt you, O Yahweh. And the last chapter of 2 Samuel is a little bit interesting. It says that the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David to count all the people of Israel and Judah. So to have a census, and the census would be important for taxes, for getting a sense of the numbers of military-aged men. And in Chronicles, instead of the anger of the Lord doing this, it was Satan doing this. But here it is the anger of the Lord actually causing David to do something. And then in verses 15, Israel will be punished for that. 70,000 of the people died from a plague that occurred because of this census being so offensive. And it may just be the people's ignorance at the time, the writer's ignorance of disease and where disease comes from. It's sort of inexplicable, and they like to have an explanation. And why would something like that happen? Why would something evil happen? And they saw it in terms of punishment from God, and yet at the same time, it's punishment from God for something that God incited David to do. So here again, we have an angry God and a God who kills people on purpose by plague. So this is the end of 2 Samuel. And I'm struck with this read through of just how negative the portrayal of the kingship of David is. We missed a couple chapters where the military exploits are described, but for David, who supposedly unified and was successful in war with all these enemies of Israel, we don't actually see a very detailed account of his alleged many wars. So we really don't know. We don't have a lot of historical validation from other sources. There's maybe only one or two that mention the house of David. But what we see, we see King David as a very problematic man, a murderer, someone who cheats on someone else's wife, even though he has many wives and many concubines. He seems cruel. He seems ineffectual in dealing with the violence and the usurpations of his own children. And it's hard to really know at this point why. The question I have is he so idealized in the later literature? It doesn't seem from 2 Samuel that that's appropriate.